So hello everyone, welcome to tonight's webinar. Tonight we're going to be talking about women's health, of course, to mark Women's Health Week, which is taking place all week this week. We're going to cover a range of different topics around the types of changes that happen to a woman over the course of her life. So my name is Kate. I'm the Community Engagement and Events Coordinator here at IHMRI. And I would like to acknowledge the Dharawal people, the traditional custodians of the land on which IHMRI sits. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal people we have joining us on the webinar tonight. So across her lifespan, a woman's body goes through many complex changes, achieving incredible feats, caring for family, building resilience, and bringing positive changes across all levels of society. But what's actually taking place inside a woman's body, and what impact do these changes have on a woman's health? From puberty to menopause, reproductive health, stress and back pain during pregnancy, and autoimmune diseases that seem to affect women more than men. It's a lot of content that we've got to cover in a relatively short amount of time, but we will absolutely do our best. So tonight we have with us Dr. Teresa Larkin. Teresa is an academic in UOW School of Medicine in a research and teaching capacity. Her main research focus is hormones and mental and maternal health. And Teresa teaches anatomy and physiology to UOW's medical students. Also with us this evening is Dr. Nadia Curtis. Nadia graduated from UOW with her Doctor of Medicine in 2019, and prior to this worked as a registered nurse for many years. She's a local medical doctor and mother of 3 young women herself. Nadia believes in empowering women of all ages to understand their body and know what's normal for them and when to seek medical advice. And finally, we have with us Dr. Michael O'Connor. Michael graduated from UOW with his Doctor of Medicine in 2018 and is currently on the Psychiatric training program. He also has degrees in osteopathy and practiced as an osteopath for six years in a women and children's clinic. Michael is an advocate for minimizing back pain during pregnancy and reducing stress on mothers and babies. So welcome to all of our panelists. So our panelists want to hear from you this evening, so please use the Q&A function just at the bottom of the screen if you do have any questions that you'd like to pose to our panelists, and use the chat function if you'd like to share any comments or any experience that you may have had, that you'd like to share with us. And just so you know, a recording of today's webinar will be available, and I will send a link around to everybody who has registered in the next few days. And finally, for those of you who don't know, the Illawarra Health and Medical Research Institute is a not-for-profit charity based here in the Illawarra. Our main goal is to connect clinicians and academic researchers to help solve our greatest health challenges. And we do research into dementia, cancer, diabetes, mental health, just to name a few. So I urge you to go and have a look at our website, ihmri.org.au, for more information on what we do. So I think we'll just get started properly now. So over to you, Teresa. I wonder if you might be able just to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So just, yeah, not much extra to add than what, oh my gosh, my lamp is going crazy. It's a disco, sorry. So yeah, not much more to add than what you said, except I thought, considering it's Women's Health Week, I'd like to say how I work with some really good women for some of my research. So one of my main research areas is looking at hormones in mental health, and that's with Sue Thomas, who's a clinical psychologist, and with Karen Walton and Karen Charlton, who are dietitians. We also work with Dr. Jackie KL, who's a psychiatrist in Wollongong. So we do our research as a collaborative team at IHMRI. And now with the dietitians on board and the psychiatrists, we can really expand into some of those different aspects affecting depression. I also work with a vascular surgeon, Dr. Laurencia Vilauba, and we're looking at ways that venous issues, so issues with the veins, can actually affect things like chronic pelvic pain, which is a big issue for women.
Fantastic. Thanks, Teresa. Nadia, is there anything that you'd like to add, just as a little introduction?
I guess that I'll have a lot of anecdotal information to add, I suppose, as a mother of 3 young women. I think I suppose I'm very invested in this as a woman myself with 3 young women that I'm raising. So yeah, really important that we get this information across, and I hope everybody enjoys it.
Fantastic. Thanks, Nadia. And Michael, over to you.
So I'm studying, on the training pathway to become a psychiatrist. But before that, when I worked as an osteopath, I just noticed that a lot of women that would come in would have sort of issues that were specific to women, especially the complexity of the pelvic floor and the ability of the woman's body to grow a baby and push it out is phenomenal. But I think like the physical task of that, plus a lot of the social pressures on women mash up to, I think, can cause a lot of tension in women's bodies. And so that's what sort of initially got me interested in what led me to do the research project with Teresa and Nadia. Obviously I don't have any personal experience as a woman, but hopefully I can add something tonight.
So it was the amazing capabilities of a woman's body that really just sucked you in and got you interested in it.
Yeah, definitely.
So we know then there's a lot going on inside a woman's body throughout different stages of their lives. Teresa, I wonder, could you talk perhaps just in a little bit more detail around what happens during puberty and reproductive years?
Yeah, so puberty, I'm presuming that most people on the webinar have been through it. So it's the real transition where we mature into the humans that we're meant to become. So I guess in terms of the female body with the ovaries, so actually a female with ovaries, they're born with all of their eggs already developed. So even by 2 months gestation, so developing in the womb, a female with ovaries has all of the eggs already there. So they actually just sit throughout the childhood period. So those eggs are there, but they haven't gone through the last final steps to be a mature egg that can be fertilized and produce a zygote, which will become another human. So at puberty, there's signals that happen that affect the hypothalamus in the brain. And one of the main ones is just basically genetics. So the thing that will determine a girl's puberty most is actually the age that her mother went through puberty herself. So there's a large genetic component, but there are other factors, things like sleep is very important. And then even the hormone leptin, which comes from fatty tissue. So these all make signals to the hypothalamus in the brain. And that stimulates the adrenal glands to produce hormones and the ovaries to produce hormones. And that's how we then have those development of the secondary sex characteristics. So all of the physical side that we see. And plus that's how we can start then the menstrual cycle. So I guess it's interesting in terms of this, of the sleep and the leptin, because some of those changes in the hormones starts off during the sleep period. So sleep is really important for prepubertal and pubertal people when they're going through that. And also, interestingly, leptin. So leptin is produced by fat tissue. And so that means that children who have more fat tissue, they often start puberty earlier because they have these higher levels of leptin. Whereas, especially it's noticeable for females, if a female has reduced levels of fatty tissue, then they can have reductions in leptin and other hormones, which can affect their menstrual cycle.
And Teresa, can you just talk us through a little bit what's happening during a menstrual cycle?
Yeah, so I love the menstrual cycle. I think it's very interesting. I like that it's got changes over the course of that time. So in terms of the menstrual cycle, obviously not all women will want to or can have children, but the menstrual cycle is set up so that we can. So obviously, a major need of any species is to perpetuate that species. And so the menstrual cycle is set up with 2 main stages. And that first stage is all about ovulation, so getting an egg out of the ovary. And then the second stage is setting up for pregnancy. So what happens in that first stage is that we have stimulus from the higher, organs, so the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, and they come down and they stimulate the ovary, and that will stimulate the continuing maturing of those eggs that have been there since birth. So every month, one of those eggs will especially be stimulated, and it will grow and it will mature to its full size, and then that will be released from the ovary. So the whole first part of the cycle is to set up getting an egg out there. Also, during that first part, we have, preparation. The uterus changes, thinking that there's going to be a pregnancy, so it starts to get thicker. That first half of the cycle is quite variable, so it can go from 1 week to 3 weeks, but the average is around 2 weeks. So once that egg has been ovulated and it's been sent out from the ovary, it will go on its way down the uterine or the fallopian tubes and make its way into the uterus. The second half of the menstrual cycle is all about preparing for pregnancy. So whereas in the first half of the cycle, we have estrogen as the dominant hormone, and that's, allowing the egg to develop and allowing the egg to grow and to be released. In the second half, it's all about progesterone. And so that means pro-gestation. So in that second half of the cycle, the progesterone sets up the uterus as an environment for the egg to grow. So it increases all the blood vessels, it increases the layers, it increases our body temperature so that there's a better immune response, thinking that this person's going to become pregnant. And all that time, there's the little follicle that's left in the ovary that released that egg, it's secreting the progesterone to make sure that that egg, if it gets fertilized, can implant. That's only got exactly a 12-day lifespan. So if an egg is not fertilized and doesn't plant in the uterus in that time, the follicle that was left in the ovary, it stops functioning. So it stops secreting any hormones. And then 2 days after that, so that's now a total of 14 days since ovulation, in that last 2 days, because there are no hormones going to the uterus and there's no signals for it to keep growing, so it basically stops, the blood vessels stop, and it's all taken away. And then that's how we get the shedding in terms of the bleed.
Gosh.
Okay, I think we had a poll there that we were going to ask participants about the hormones.
Yeah, pop that up now. So for our audience members, hopefully you can see this poll. So the question is, where are the female hormones, estrogen and progesterone, mostly produced? The pituitary gland, the adrenal glands, fat tissue, ovaries, or the uterus? So I'll just give you a few seconds to tick on the answer that you think is accurate. Oh. Just a few more seconds. The pituitary gland, adrenal glands, fat tissue, ovaries, or the uterus. Where are the female hormones, estrogen and progesterone, mostly produced? We've only had 20% of you answer. Quickly. All right, let's end the poll there. Thanks everyone who answered, and I'll share those results. Teresa.
Yeah, so interesting. That's a very, very even split, isn't it? So the female hormones are all produced in the ovaries. Or sorry, I shouldn't say are all, they're mostly produced in the ovaries. But the pituitary gland is a really important organ in that pathway. So it's actually the pituitary gland that sends hormones that stimulate the ovaries to then release or make and release the estrogen and the progesterone. And then they can have effects at the uterus. So interesting, as I mentioned before about fat. So fat is actually able to also metabolize other hormones to make estrogen. And then the adrenal glands can have a little bit, which we'll come back to when we talk about menopause. Did you have a question, Kate?
Yes, sorry, Teresa. Just while we're on that, there's a question come through. Is reduced leptin an issue with young athletes and puberty?
So there is, and like you guys can add to this as well. So definitely there are cases where athletes who are very lean body mass, that they can stop having their periods or they can stop ovulating. And that's to do with the leptin and the estrogen because of the low fat tissue. So that is definitely something. Nadia and Michael, do you guys want to add to that?
I was just say I just worked in the centre in RPA, and just adjacent to where I was working, we had the anorexia ward where most of the women there were not ovulating for the same reason. So because they for a different reason, the athletes, they had very, very low fat content, but it's because of the fat content that they were not getting their periods, and that's actually one of the criteria for admission into that space.
Right.
So I suppose, the take home with the reproductive cycle is that it's a cycle once a month to set up to maximize the body's chance of releasing an egg and then having the uterus ready to implant that egg. So every time a woman has a natural, menstrual cycle, it is that the body is assuming that there's going to be an egg released, it's going to be fertilized, and we need to set it up for implantation. Nadia, did you want to add some clinical and interesting information to all of that?
Sure. So obviously, as a woman, we see different things as this all goes on. So the physiology underlying, and I guess that it's important to know what is normal and what's not, as it appears. I guess really important from the get-go. You mentioned puberty earlier. Really important from the get-go that we teach our young girls what is normal and what's not. So right from development stuff. So little girls will start to develop breast buds and things like that. So teaching them to be confident in their body and know that that's going on, because all that forms healthy body image later on in life, which is really essential. So talking to our girls at a young age about what to expect and what's normal and what's not sort of sets them up really, really well. Things you talked about, the hormones in the brain. One of the first things you see with the sign of puberty, as any mother would know, is some mood changes, which are always a bit difficult to navigate sometimes. So you might see that what was your bright and happy little girl is suddenly a bit more snappy than normal and a bit sort of seems to be walking around with a dark cloud over the head. That is quite normal with the hormonal changes and the changes in the connections, as Teresa will probably talk about, connections in the brain as they're developing all these things. So, making our young girls aware of all that. Then you sort of roll on to periods themselves and, when this all happens, knowing what is a normal period and what's not a normal period. So I know a lot of women in the community have a very difficult time with heavy menstrual bleeding, and some people aren't quite aware of what's normal and what's not, so suffer needlessly, really, in having very, very heavy periods. And the associated side effects that come from that. If you're having a large blood loss, then you can become anemic, which is then fatigued, short of breath, all these sorts of things that can go on. So being aware of what is a normal period, and also being aware of what your normal periods are, so that when things change, that you have an idea that things are going on. And again, talking to our girls about that so that they're aware as well.
And Nadia, can you just briefly let us know, like, what would be a normal period? What would that look like?
So just to have an idea, so I've just got it all written out in front of me as to the Women's Hospital, what they've listed, so that I'm not giving any false information here. So they've specified that your period is heavy if you're passing lumps or bloods or clots, that are larger than a 50-cent piece. If you're bleeding so much that you have to change your pad or tampon every hour, of course, the management of that in itself is going to be probably drive you to the doctor. I think that would be a busy day. If you're having to get up most nights to change your pad or tampon, or if you're bleeding through overnight, if you're having to put a towel or anything in your bed, that is not normal. Or having to use maternity pads, that's also not normal. If you're bleeding through clothing, despite, changes of your pads or tampons, and if your bleeding sort of lasts more than 8 days. When I say bleeding lasts more than 8 days, I'm not talking about sort of that very, brownish not much discharge there. I'm talking a full bleed for that long. And so they're the criteria that they've set out there. And the other thing that, you know, being aware of those symptoms that I mentioned earlier on are the side effects of having heavy blood loss with you. If you're feeling tired, if you're feeling weak or dizzy or short of breath, or especially chest pains, then definitely that's something that you need to seek medical advice for and be led by your clinician.
I'll just add, it's very cheap to get a blood test to look at your iron studies. So you can easily, if you're not too sure about how much bleeding is normal, or about your blood loss or something, a blood test from a GP is very cheap, or will probably cost you nothing, but it's very cheap for the government and easy to perform. And you can look at your iron levels and your amount of hemoglobin, and if you're otherwise a healthy woman, and those are a bit off, it might point to, you know, your periods being a bit heavier, and then, you know, just an iron supplement or something might be able to help with that. Or you can get a referral to a specialist. Yeah, and get it checked out. Sorry, Teresa.
I was going to say, should we put the poll up, do you think, Nadia? Did you want to see what about the general health concerns of women and their health at the moment?
If everyone's ready for another poll, yeah, sure.
All right. We do have some questions as well that I think would be really, really interesting. So we'll jump. Actually, do you mind if I jump to one of those just now? Just, for example, one of the questions here, and by the way, everything's coming through anonymously, and there was a comment in the chat. So thank you for mentioning that. When we do the polls, everything is anonymous. So we won't know who's suggested what might be the right answers. Just bear that in mind for the next one. But is there any truth in women living in the same household syncing their menstrual cycles?
Oh, I've definitely experienced that with good friends and sisters.
You have,
but maybe it's just the number of people that you know.
I would certainly say that I've experienced the same thing, but that is purely anecdotal. I haven't actually read any research around it, but I understand there was a theory. It was sort of a tribal thing, is that, you know, from way back when.
Yeah, when I guess when we weren't monogamous, perhaps.
Yeah.
Just throw that out there. And you mentioned about heavy periods, Nadia, and there was a question here around endometriosis, which we know can cause heavy periods. Can endometriosis be identified during the early years of a menstrual cycle? We know sometimes it does take quite a few years to actually be diagnosed. Are you able to comment on that at all?
Certainly can. Endometriosis, yeah, it's a big issue in the community. Unfortunately, people do take a long time to be diagnosed. So certainly flagging that really heavy periods and painful periods are not normal. And, you know, you should definitely see your doctor. So stats wise, I think 1 in 10 women, sorry, I'm looking down just to see my numbers that I've written down here. 1 in 10 women do have, you know, some level of endometriosis, and obviously it depends on the degree. But yeah, certainly would be seeking medical advice with very heavy and painful periods, and early on. Don't wait. It's important to get onto these things early.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Nadia.
Kate, I can just see a couple of questions that are sort of related to menopause. So we will get to that as we go through, just so that those people know. And I saw another one about fibroids. So someone was told that fibroids were an accumulation of unused eggs, which isn't true, because the fibroids are in the uterus. And so they're just but they're a benign tumour, really, a growth usually related to increased estrogen secretion. They're quite common, Nadia and Michael, the different types, aren't they? And depending on which layer of the uterus they're in, they'll have different symptoms.
Great. Thanks, Teresa. Thanks, Nadia. So I'll put that poll up now. So this is around general women's health concerns. So I'll just launch that poll. Remember, it is anonymous, so take part if you're keen to. So the question is, what are the key health priority areas for girls and women in Australia according to the 2020 National Women's Health Strategy? So do you think it's maternal, sexual and reproductive health? Do you think it's healthy aging, chronic conditions and preventative health, mental health, or health impacts of violence against women and girls? what do you think are the key health priority areas for girls and women in Australia, according to the 2020 National Women's Health Strategy? I'll just give you a few more seconds.
I actually have never looked up the cycling together because I love all the evolutionary aspects of it. So I'll have to look into that. Kate, you've made me think.
Absolutely. Let us know, Teresa, and I'll put that in the follow-up email that I send out. All right, I'll share those results. Nadia, can you just talk us through those results that we've got there?
I sure can. I'm just going to move them out of the middle of my screen so I can see what I'm looking at. So it's good there's an even balance there, which to me, that's a good sign that we're quite aware. So every single one of those things was listed as a strategy on the Women's Health Strategy in 2020. So every one of those 5 was identified as an issue for women's health. And looking at those things there, I suppose the community seem to be quite aware by the looks of that these are issues. So around maternal and sexual and reproductive health, we're just wanting to focus on making sure that women have healthy pregnancies. So we're putting things in place to ensure that's happened. We've made great moves on that in, for instance, reducing smoking in pregnancy. So it's been some great changes in there. In regards to healthy aging, women don't do well with aging. Unfortunately, well, I mean, it's excellent that we live longer, but with living longer, we have more comorbidities. There's a large percentage of the population that have dementia are women. 3 million women live in poverty. So, for the financial aspects, we don't do well at end of life. So healthy aging is really important. Women are also quite susceptible to certain issues later in life with hormone changes. And we'll talk to that later on when we talk about menopause and changes there. The big one that covers all the age groups is mental health. As Michael mentioned earlier, we share a big burden as women in trying to juggle many aspects of our lives, and we go through all different periods in our life that makes us more susceptible to having mental health challenges. So right from puberty, you think about puberty, men sort of tend to get these, they get bigger and they get these muscles, and so puberty for men is seems to be a lovely experience. I mean, I haven't been through it. I don't know what you would say, Michael, but whereas women, we kind of do it a bit differently. We put on fatty deposits in different areas that we may not like so much. So right from the get-go, we have issues with being challenged by our own bodies. Then you roll through and you've got fertility issues if you do have them, problems with your periods. You've got parenting, being a mother, and the juggling of the triple role. And then rolling on to being a carer and the not burden, probably that's not the right word, but the challenges that caring for other people present. So mental health is a big issue across the lifespan, right from, very early on till late in life. Chronic conditions, we have women unfortunately don't tend to be recognised for cardiac disease as well as men. So women present quite differently. If you're having a heart attack, you may not present with the same symptoms as men. So we go under notice sometimes with that and may not have the appropriate treatment early. And then the big one that has been really communicated a bit better lately has been the health impacts of violence against women and girls. The 1 in 3 women have experienced some kind of violence towards them in their lifestyle, which then of course has roll-on effects in your mental health as you go through the lifespan.
If I could just add to the concerns about mental health through women, as I mentioned, I'm now doing psychiatry. Some mental health conditions are more common in women, but I think broadly, given all of the pressures coming from all different directions on women, the fact that women aren't hugely overrepresented in the mental health sector as a whole points towards the resilience that women also have. In that, I think potentially on the whole, women are really well equipped to deal with all these challenges. It's sort of an impossible debate to sort of say how men would cope with those challenges, because then they wouldn't be men. But yeah, I think it's something for women to own, that yeah, they triumph in spite of all the difficulties.
Thanks, Michael. I will just acknowledge, thank you so much to everyone who has been sending, posting those questions. They are here, and I won't forget about them, but we may not have time to get to all of them, but please keep them coming in, and we can try our best to answer them offline in the follow-up email that we send. But just really grateful for all the questions coming through. But there is a question that's just come through for you, Michael, on what you were just discussing. Is there a barrier to seeking psychiatric help for women whose moods change with their cycle?
I suppose it's a broad question. Difficult to, is if there's if there's a barrier. I mean, like, perhaps they're asking what services are available.
Well, for example, in society, and in particular, some women's partners may at times criticize their mood.
You're just hormonal, or
yeah, exactly. You're crazy. You're just being emotional. It's just because you're on your
time of the
period.
month or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's, again, this is something women have to deal with. I think it's a societal, it's a hangover from a long time ago, when society would just write women off as being irrational and overly emotional and histrionic. Histrionic comes from, hysteria comes from like hysterectomy, it's Greek or Latin, pertaining to the uterus. So in the idea was men were rational and women were driven by their uterus and irrational. So yeah, there's a society we're still progressing, and there's huge hangovers from that. I don't know if that answers the question.
I think so. And I guess it goes back to what Nadia was saying earlier, that for women just to own what's the experiences that they're going through, and if they do think that something is wrong, go and seek help, go and speak to your GP. The sooner the better. You don't need to suffer unnecessarily. Get that help from your GP, and then potentially from the specialist if required. So wonderful. Okay, well, I think we'll move on. I'm just aware of the time. Sorry, Theresa, I'm not doing very well at timekeeping.
No, it's good.
We're going to touch on autoimmune diseases, because I know that women, for some reason, seem to be more prone to certain autoimmune conditions. Is there any evidence behind why that might be, and what kind of conditions are more prevalent in women? I don't know, Nadia or Michael, whether you'd like to answer that one.
I don't have a lot to contribute, but I will say in pregnancy, so the immune system probably is a little bit different between men and women. And one of the reasons is that a woman's body has to, evolved to grow a baby, which is essentially, 50% of that baby's DNA will be foreign DNA. And the woman's immune system therefore has to, when she's pregnant, not attack the baby. And so it has to dial down some things, and then it has to compensate for what's dialed down by ramping up other elements of the immune system. And that sort of complexity can potentially lead to problems whereas a man's immune system is able to be more consistent throughout their life. That's one component. I don't know if, Nadia, you have other thoughts?
So yeah, essentially, lucky us as women, we have 2 X chromosomes. So a lot of the, Teresa, correct me if I'm wrong, as a lot of the coding for your immune system comes from the X chromosome. So essentially, we're more predisposed because we have two sets of that sort of DNA. And from an awareness perspective, as women, we need to be aware that, we're more predisposed to these conditions. So being aware that, symptoms, say for, if you've got joint pain and things like that, don't just sign it off to, I've got a bit of a bad back, or I've been doing too much in the garden. Being aware that these things could be a manifestation of an autoimmune condition, particularly in sort of the 30s age bracket, where it sometimes can rear its head. So, for a young woman in her 30s to be having joint pain, that's something that you need to be mindful of.
Mm. Right.
I think just overall as well, because we have growth, so females who are having a menstrual cycle are having growth of tissue and loss of tissue. So there's sort of just these changes that can really affect the autoimmune response, and things like thyroid disease are really common amongst females of reproductive age.
Great, thanks everyone. Okay, so I think we'll just move along to talk a little bit about pregnancy and what's happening. What is happening inside a woman's body during pregnancy? Teresa, can you just give us a bit of an overview?
Yeah, so I guess just as an overview, if we're thinking back to how I described that menstrual cycle, and I said that in the second half of the menstrual cycle, it's all about preparing for pregnancy. And so if that doesn't happen, the follicle that was left in the ovary secreting the progesterone, it dies off. But if there's implantation, then that embryo that's implanted, it makes a hormone called beta-HCG, which people might have heard about. That's what you can test in your urine as early as day 7, or is it in your urine from day 7, or plasma or blood, you guys? Anyway, it's very early on, it's very high, and I'm sure you can test it in both, and that's an indicator of pregnancy. And so that then will keep that follicle living, so it doesn't die off. So it's then secreting lots of progesterone until the placenta comes into action. So it takes a while for the placenta to develop, but by 8 to 12 weeks, then the placenta takes over, and that's when your beta-HCG drops off, which is usually the time that morning sickness drops off because it's associated with that. And then the placenta secretes huge amounts of progesterone and estrogen, so much higher than during a normal cycle. So the estrogen is important for increasing blood flow to the woman's uterus and to the placenta for the developing baby. The progesterone is important for the health of the uterus, so that the implant will stay. It's also a muscle relaxant, so that the uterus doesn't contract and expel the growing embryo too early. But that does mean that women can have effects of constipation while they're pregnant, because everything's sort of too relaxed. And then there's lots of changes to lots of other hormones and physiological processes. So increasing in thyroid hormone, in getting calcium from the diet. And then even things like an increase in blood volume to get all that extra blood to the fetus, as well as in blood coagulability. So the amount that the blood can stick, and that's actually in preparation so that there's hopefully no blood loss during childbirth. So the body is very good at, preempting and knowing what it needs. There is, as Michael sort of alluded to, there's a reduction in immune response during pregnancy, because we don't want the woman's body rejecting that baby. But it does mean that a pregnant woman is more susceptible to viral infections. So yeah, overall, things like that. So increasing the blood volume can result in low iron, so a bit of anemia, and the increase in the coagulability can increase the risk of things like deep vein thrombosis and pulmonary embolism. So there's lots of things that are kept in check. But again, just thinking of the line of women's health, a lot of aspects of pregnancy that still need to be considered in terms of health benefit or health effects beyond that.
Thanks, Teresa.
Nadia and Michael, did you guys want to add anything to that?
I feel like I keep being the awareness bell. Be aware, be aware. So I think you mentioned about nausea and vomiting, Teresa. I think there is an element of that that's normal, but then downstream you can get a thing called hyperemesis gravidarum, which is not the nicest scenario, where you just basically cannot stop vomiting. So I suppose, being aware of the fact that there is an element of being nauseous until that placenta kicks in and takes over, that is normal. And I can see somebody's popped up in the chat screen and said, grateful for ondansetron. I'm sure there's quite a few women out there that are very grateful for the drugs that are available. Obviously, being cautious in pregnancy with the medications that you use, but talking to your doctor as to, how much this is affecting you, and also, how much intake you're able to manage. So it's important you're still managing your fluids and your food, so because you're trying to grow a baby as well. So being aware, as I said again, that there is normal and there's not normal, and just to chat with your doctor if you've got concerns.
Thanks, Nadia. Michael, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I don't have anything to add to.
Okay. Well, we know that there are lots of changes that are happening inside a woman's body during pregnancy. Some of them not terribly pleasant. And from what I understand, one of them is, unfortunately, back pain is really quite prevalent in pregnant women. So, Michael, I think that you've done a lot of research into this. Can you just tell us a little bit about what you found out during your research?
Yeah, sure. If I
Should we do that poll?
Oh, yeah, great idea.
Let's pop the poll up. So everyone in the audience, I'll launch this poll. So what percentage of women do you think experience back or pelvic pain during pregnancy?
Something's gone wrong with those numbers there.
Oh, that would be my fault.
So that's okay. Let's make them. It should go 10%, 20%, 40%, 60%, 80%.
Oh, that's what I can see.
Oh, sorry. I'm looking at 1.1, 2.2. Oh my God. I'm so sorry. I'm like, oh my gosh. Sorry, everyone.
So it is, just to clarify, it is 10%, 20%, 40%, 60%.
I was like, that's 80%. Weird. I'm used to looking at numbers and seeing them just written like that.
Yeah, sorry, I should have put a space
No,
there.
no, sorry.
All right, let's end that poll. Share the results, Michael. What's
cool.
the...
Okay,
Can you talk us through those results?
Yeah, the answer is 60%, and that's what we've got there. It's a draw between 60 and 80%.
Yeah.
It's 60%.
60%.
So this is what the research was that I did with Teresa and Nadia, which maybe we'll talk about the research in a sec. First, I was thinking about the best way to summarize this, but if you go all the way back to the start of human evolution, essentially humans were in an advantage because they could walk on two legs. But to be able to walk on two legs, they need to have a narrow pelvis. But we've got these big brains. I think they're the biggest brains in the mammal world. So there's this compromise. We have a narrow pelvis so we can walk on two legs, but we have this big brain that needs to get through the narrow pelvis. So really, human evolution is on this knife edge where there's this sweet spot, and Mother Nature is quite cruel. She doesn't really care about the individual, just about the general process of evolution. So if a lot of people die during or have traumatic childbirth or something, just so long as there's that, the majority have an evolutionary advantage of being smart and fast, then that's going to continue. And so we're still at that stage in human evolution. So that's one concept that I think is important to think of, like why there's often so much trauma in childbirth. And the other thing sort of gets back to our study and what I used to see when I worked as an osteopath all the time. Like so many women would come in with experiencing just physical pain during pregnancy. And I just thought that that's a stress they don't need, with everything else going on, and then their back is killing them or the pelvis is killing them. And often it would respond really well to treatment. And it's just annoying to think this is a stress women don't need. I'd like to just talk about why I think that is. If you think about a skeleton, just like a cartoon skeleton, the most simple skeleton you can think of, that's held together with ligaments. So they join all the bones together, and they hold everything together. But then there's also the muscles on that skeleton. The muscles move the skeleton, but the muscles also hold everything together as well. What happens when we get pregnant? Teresa was talking about the hormones, but that some of the hormones soften the ligaments, particularly around the pelvis, obviously, so we can get this big head through the narrow pelvis. And in a natural setting, that would be okay, because women are all day, or all humans used to stand up, sit down, squat, run around, do different things all day. Take it to this modern setting. Most of us have a job or are sitting down all the day. And when you sit down on your bum, all the muscles around your hips start to weaken. So then, and that's okay, but then you become pregnant, the ligaments soften. And if those muscles are weak around the pelvis and the low back, what's holding the skeleton together? There's not much, and things start to go wrong, as you can imagine. And I just think, like, so what our research looked at was just some really very simple strengthening of some of the big muscles around the hips to improve pain during pregnancy. And the studies generally supported. The study, we saw 30 people were part of the study. Sorry, someone keeps calling. No one ever calls me. Yeah, so that was what our study looked at. I think it's interesting, especially strengthening muscles. It costs nothing, and it's not a complicated thing. You don't need to go to the gym. You can just use your own body weight to just activate muscles that are a bit weak, because because in this modern society we sit down for everything, and it's an awful situation for women to have, but it's got this really simple, free, low cost solution. So anyway.
So would that be exercises like, squats and lunges?
Yeah, those things are good, but they're kind of complex. If you think about a squat, that uses so many muscles. So even just doing something like lying on your back and doing the glute bridges, to activate the glutes, or lying on the side and lifting one leg up and down.
Like a clam?
Like a clam. That was what our research was on, the clam. I don't know if everyone knows it. That's even just basic body weighted stuff like that. And you can really progress it to make it really challenging, or if you're just starting off, just using, it can be really simple.
Yeah, okay. So there are solutions to back pain during pregnancy, but if you are one of the 60% of women who are suffering, then go and seek help to strengthen those muscles, and that should help relieve some of the pain. Yeah. All right. Thanks for that, Michael. Gosh, I can't believe how quickly time is flying this evening. Apologies, we haven't been able to get to all the questions. We'll keep moving through, but I definitely want to touch on menopause. So when menopause hits, what's happening? What's happened?
So we'll do that last poll, throw that one out there. Apologies that I was so rude about the numbers, but I just read them as 1 point something, 2 point something.
Oh, you weren't the only one. I can see in the chat that other people are seeing that as well. So I'll launch this poll.
Yeah.
So how many eggs are in the ovaries at birth? So when a woman is born, they're born with all of their eggs, as Teresa already said, but how many eggs are there at birth? Is it 1 million, 250,000, 100,000, 10,000, or 500? Just give you a few more seconds to answer that poll. And remember, this is anonymous.
Because essentially, just while people are answering with time, so menopause is essentially where we don't have any more eggs. So we're born with our number of eggs, which we'll see what people think, and then over a lifetime, they just are gradually dying off. And that's normal. And I guess even from an evolutionary perspective, because a woman who is, say, 45 or 50 probably isn't well set up physiologically to carry and birth. So I guess it's a safety mechanism. We've got to split between some very different numbers there, but it is actually 1 to 2 million eggs at birth. So 1 to 2 million eggs at birth, around 250,000 at puberty. Less than 500 of those will be ovulated over a lifetime, if we think of about, say, 40 years with around 12 periods in a year.
So do you know, why do we start off with so many then, if we actually only need around 500 over?
It's a good question. Maybe, just the way that they're produced originally. And also, I suppose, because throughout life, it's those follicles that hold the eggs that are secreting those hormones. And we need those hormones, estrogen and progesterone, to have the development of the other eggs and to have all of our functions. So that might be one of the reasons. But essentially, as those eggs in their follicles just die off normally over the course of a lifetime, because it's those follicles that are secreting the hormones, secreting estrogen and progesterone, especially the estrogen, well, as they die off, it just means that overall, the estrogen that's being secreted is also reducing. So it goes hand in hand that as the eggs die, the estrogen reduces. So when we get down to 0 eggs and pretty much no estrogen coming from the ovaries, that's essentially menopause. So obviously there's the perimenopausal area where there's reductions and there's sort of different communication between the ovaries back to the pituitary gland. But yeah, once we've got like a reduction in estrogen, and that's the cause of all of those symptoms of menopause. Just to note, one of the first questions we asked about where hormones come from, there is a weak estrogen produced in the adrenal glands, which is the organ that also produces adrenaline, but it's not very strong. So for menopausal women, they do have a low level of estrogen that's coming from their adrenal glands. But yeah, the low estrogen is pretty much the cause of all of those symptoms of menopause.
And Nadia or Michael, could you just talk us through what are those symptoms of menopause? What should women look out for? And we know we need to look at what's normal for them, but what is considered a normal part of menopause or normal symptoms of menopause?
So initially, you'll start to see some changes in cycles. So they'll start to stretch out a bit further. And then you've got the dreaded hot flashes or hot flushes, depends on who you talk to. So I'm not quite there yet, but my understanding of how it might feel is sort of a hot feeling that radiates sort of from your chest and up and around your neck. And then there's some other things that the hormone changes can cause issue with. So you can have problems with sleep, some sleep disturbances, mood changes, and then another one that people don't talk about, because we're all a bit secret squirrel about things that go on down below, is some discomfort and pain during sexual intercourse, and some vaginal dryness, which all these are all a result of hormonal changes, which is certainly something that can be treated. So again, another one that a lot of women needlessly suffer with issues, and it can cause a lot of trouble in relationships. So you can imagine you're hot flushing all the time, you're moody, you're not sleeping, and then sex is off the table. So you can imagine there's some relationship real strain in that at that time of life. So really important if you've got these symptoms and they're bothering you. Some people are lucky enough they can go through menopause and they go, oh, well, I'm done, and that was it. Whereas some people just get hit with a hot flash hammer and, they have a rotten time. So certainly if you're having issues with that, definitely something you need to see your GP about.
And what kind of age would you be looking out for those symptoms? Again, of course, I understand everybody's different, but is there like an age range that you might start experiencing those symptoms?
So most definitely there is sort of an age range, sort of anything under 45, we start to say that's a bit early, and so worth checking out with your GP. 45 and up, you're sort of looking to see if these symptoms are going on. Still would recommend, if you are seeing signs of menopause coming, to catch up with your GP anyway, because it's really important to have your GP engaged so that they can help you out with these things as they happen. Before 45, certainly something to get checked out. Also would mention too is that another thing that's worth checking out is if you haven't had a period for some time and you do have some bleeding later on, that's really important to check out, because there can be some other things going on there that your GP needs to address.
There's a great question here. Teresa mentioned earlier that the age of the mother's puberty is a predictor of the age of daughter's puberty. Is the same true for when someone might start their menopause?
Oh, I don't know straight off, but it could be. It's definitely the puberty one is known. It's one of the biggest, well, it seems to be the biggest influence, like from, what I've read. But yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if it is then. Yeah.
And do we know why some women experience menopause for, say, a period of 10 years and others go through it very quickly? Do we understand why it varies so greatly from woman to woman, the length of those symptoms and menopause?
I don't know about you, Teresa, but I'm not sure the mechanism behind it. I guess, given that it's hormone based, it might be to do with your how reactive you are, how sensitive that's what I'm after. So your estrogen sensitivity, because we know throughout the lifetime that some women experience periods completely differently to others. So I would think it would be something to do with your sensitivity to those hormones and the hormonal changes. Like some people have terrible symptoms before their periods, for instance. Some people you wouldn't even know. So I would guess, not sure what Teresa has to say about this as the physiologist.
I agree. Yeah, you would know. I agree. Yeah, I think so too. And just, that's how even things like someone mentioned on the chat before, like polycystic ovary syndrome, like it's all to do with, just slightly different levels of the hormones coming from the pituitary or coming from the adrenal glands or coming from the ovaries. There's so many effects that can happen. So yeah, that's another case of where it can be affected by genetics, but then also by lifestyle. And I do think that lots of things have a lifestyle impact. I mean, there's obviously a lot of genetics, but that's where there's always then lots of research looking into dietary components, exercise, sleep, lots of those interactions.
So I guess not only is every woman different physiologically, but the environment in which they live, everything, there's so many different variables to consider when you're thinking about what's normal. So I guess back to Nadia's, think about what's normal for you, and if that's changing, then go and see your GP, if that's right, Nadia.
Can I chime in on that also, Teresa? You mentioned polycystic ovaries disease, which a lot of people do suffer with. Again, on the awareness spell, just being mindful in younger women. It's good to teach women to be aware of when their periods are due and aren't due, to note if there's any issues with regularity. Just because one of the signs of polycystic ovaries disease is irregularity in periods or absence. You might miss them and then they might turn up, then not turn up. Other signs that you might see is, increased hair. You might have more hair than other people. You might be having juggles with your weight and real struggles with your weight. So a few of these signs are, good to have a read up on that, because early diagnosis of polycystic ovaries disease is really important. So certainly chase up with your GP if you've got sort of signs and symptoms that might suggest you've got polycystic ovaries, so that you can get engaged with an ONG earlier so that they can help you out.
I remember in med school we learned about often women compare what's normal for them with they might only talk about their periods or their reproductive things with their mum and their sisters and maybe their aunts or something, and essentially there might be there's a strong genetic component. They might all have, say, really heavy periods or something like that, and even though it's normal in that family, actually they're all skewed to one side, and they're actually experiencing unnecessary suffering. It's just that they've all got the problem. So again, just have a think. If you're not sure, just as Nadia is saying, talk to your GP, because they'll probably have a better idea as to where you are in the spectrum of normal to abnormal in terms of your reproductive health.
And talk to each other. Like really important to talk about these things, and this is why we're here today. I think I would like to think that we've moved on from that, that era that, you've got your period, you hide away in a room for a week and don't talk to anybody. It's important that, talk to your girlfriends, have establish those relationships. Something's weird going on, oh God, what happens with you? That kind of chat that's important to have as well, just so that, you might be helping somebody else out. You might be talking about something that they've thought was normal, and you might be both having issues.
Absolutely. Gosh, I can't believe how quickly time's gone tonight. We've got so many questions that I'd love to get to that we just aren't going to have time for. I just wanted to ask our panelists, you can see the questions. Are there any questions that you think you would like to answer before we wrap up that have come through?
Not more for me.
I'm just giggling about somebody just said they think we should still be able to hide away in a room for a week when we get a period. I agree.
Absolutely. Actually, there's a question here. Is it normal to have cramps during your menstrual cycle? But when, like, what is, and this might be a difficult one to answer, I guess, but when should somebody actually seek medical attention for pain during their periods?
So I've certainly been told that if it's disruptive to your life, and I know that's a very broad thing, but, you know, if you're missing days of work or if you are, for instance, with endometriosis, you can have pain when you're passing urine, or pain when you're, you know, going to the toilet to have a poo, or pain during sex. All those things are completely abnormal, and you definitely need to seek help if that's going on. Some cramping, as you say, some cramping can happen because your uterus is essentially contracting down to try and get rid of the, you know, the period products, but, you know, it shouldn't be disrupting your life.
Yeah. All right. Well, I wonder, do you have any take-home messages for our audience? If there's one thing you'd like them to take away from the webinar, what would it be, Teresa?
I think to embrace the female menstrual cycle, like amongst females, males, however, you know, sexually gender diverse individuals, because I think that it is something that's really interesting, and yeah, it's got some interesting aspects of physiology and how we function, and the aim of humans to reproduce.
Great, thanks, Teresa. Michael?
I would just say I encourage everyone to just take an interest in their own health, and knowledge is power. So the more you can learn about how your body works, the more you're empowered to know when things aren't working properly, and for everyone to get a GP that they can have over the long time, the person who can know their health and get that continuity of care.
And would it be fair to say to find a GP who you trust, and if you're seeing a GP that you're not, for whatever reason, you're not quite as comfortable as you'd like to be, or find it, just try another one, go and find a different GP?
Yep, definitely.
Okay, thanks. Nadia, any what would you like our audience to take away with them?
So I'd certainly second that, a good GP, and it might just be, a GP is a relationship, you know, you some people you wouldn't go out with, the same thing, you wouldn't necessarily have them as your GP. It's not anything to do with the fact that they're, you know, the qualifications. It's just a relationship that you need to get along, and you need to understand each other. So some fits work, some fits don't. Have a look around until you find somebody that works for you. And surprise, surprise, my message is be aware and talk, you know. So be aware of what's normal, what's not, and talk to each other. Talk to your girls, tell them that's what's normal, and, you know, be proud of the fact that we're women and we are amazing creatures, and the stuff that we do with our body is just, you know, well, men can't do it.
Great, thanks everyone. Well, look, we've already gone over time, so I will stop us there. I want to apologise that we haven't been able to get to all the questions. As much as we can, if my panel agree, I might just send those questions that we haven't been able to get to you in an email, so that when I send the follow-up email, I'll try and answer as many of those in the follow-up email as I can. So bear with us for that follow-up email. It might take a little bit longer to get to you, but some of the questions were fantastic, and I just want to thank you all for being so involved in the webinar this evening. Huge thanks, of course, to our panelists, to Teresa, Michael and Nadia. We know you're super busy, so we really appreciate you taking time to prepare for the webinar, and also for being here this evening and sharing your expertise. It's been wonderful to hear from each of you. Follow our Facebook if you don't already. It's @IHMRI, and we also have a Twitter page as well, which is IHMRI. There's lots of information around the type of research that's coming out of IHMRI, and also any clinical trials. Obviously, there aren't as many clinical trials happening at the moment during COVID, but we're always looking for people to get involved. So check that out. And if you haven't already, sign up to our newsletter. It's bi-monthly. We keep them short and sweet with links to the website where you can read further into the research that's happening. And you can find that on our website, which is at www.imri.org.au. And you'll also hear about upcoming events. So, for example, in the new year, we're hoping, COVID restrictions pending, to open up the facility to allow you, our community, to come in and see where this incredible research happens, what amazing facilities you have right on your doorstep in the Illawarra. And we also, of course, will continue with our webinars once a month. Next month, of course, October is Mental Health Awareness Month. So we're running a webinar looking at the impact of the pandemic and what we can do to, to really support one another, and provide just a little bit of guidance on how to come out of this pandemic as unscathed as possible, I guess. So we'd love to see you all there. If you have any questions, please send me an email. Otherwise, I hope to see you at the next webinar. So thank you so much to everyone again, and we'll hopefully see you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.